Hello to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be here speaking to you today. My name is Ann Weiner, and I'm going to be talking to you about a body of work that I've spent the last 10 years researching and creating. Uh, the name of the work is When Caged Birds Sing. And that title is taken from the poem by Maya Angelou called Caged Birds. The caged birds in my exhibition are 8 women who have been abused because of their gender and then had the resilience and wherewithal to move forward in their lives and make a difference for other women who are still at risk. I'll be talking mostly about the inspiration for this exhibition and the ways in which it was created, as well as the stories of the women themselves. The exhibition was first installed at Brown University in 2017. It then traveled to the Housatonic Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 2018, and went on to Southern Connecticut State University in 2020, where it was part of the university's Social Justice Month. Now, in the time of COVID, the exhibition has been stalled and is in a warehouse waiting for its next installation opportunity, which will most likely be at Queens College in Queens, New York. After that, a museum is taking custodianship of the exhibition. It will be part of their permanent collection and hopefully will be shown at colleges and universities as a teaching tool for years to come. The 8 women who are, the stories of the 8 women who are honored in the exhibition have been verified in biographies and autobiographies, interviews, and documentaries. These are contemporary stories happening in our lifetime, and all of them are true. I'll begin now by showing you slides of the images that you would see if you were at the exhibition itself. Slide 1, please. At each venue where the show has been installed, there's an opening graphic and a stanza from the poem Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. The poem of the bird, as I said before, is a metaphor for the women trapped in their gender, as the birds are trapped in their cages. In the entrance hall of each gallery is also a large screen video featuring the actress Carla Renee reciting the full Maya Angelou poem. Her reading is played throughout the gallery space as background for the visual elements. The video presents an overview of what you would see and hear as you walk through the area, exhibiting the 8 life-size sculptures in the installation. At this point, I will play the video for you.
The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird dreams of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, His shadow shouts on a nightmare screen. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free and be free.
From the video, you get the ambience in the gallery, the feel of the exhibition, as well as the visuals. I'm often asked how I came up with the inspiration for this work, and I enjoy recounting the story. I had just finished reading a wonderful book by the author Sue Monk Kidd called The Invention of Wings. The Invention of Wings is about two Caucasian sisters who were brought up on a southern slave-owning plantation and became active abolitionists. The book honors the work of these two women. At the end of the book, there's an epilogue in which the author, Monk Kidd, explains that her inspiration for the book came when she went to the Brooklyn Museum of Art and saw the permanent exhibition called The Dinner Party by a feminist artist named Judy Chicago. In this iconic exhibition, there are 99 women who Judy Chicago honors by preparing a large dining table for them, and at each of their seats creating unique and magnificent place settings that speak to their stories and their place in history. Along with the 99 women heroes that she honors, the dinner itself, there are over 700 ceramic floor tiles in the dining room itself. And on each of these floor tiles is the name of another woman that she wanted to be sure were permanently recognized. When Sue Monk Kidd went to the exhibition, it was on those floor tiles that she first learned of the name of the Grimsky Sisters. As soon as I read that, a light bulb went off in my mind. And I said, well, this is what I want to do now. I want to honor contemporary women in this way. I want to bring to the world's attention the lives of contemporary women who have suffered abuse because of their gender, had the resilience to move forward in their lives, and have made substantial differences in the lives of those still suffering. I wasn't sure how I would go about doing this. The first step became research as to which of the global human rights abuses I felt were most prevalent in the 21st century and needed the most attention. I eventually narrowed those issues down to 8 categories of abuse, and then researched which woman would represent that type of crime. In some cases, I had many choices that I could make. For example, in the area of domestic violence, there were so many people around the globe who had been abused in that way and were resilient and made a difference. So in that case, I had to vet all of the stories and find the one that I felt to be particularly compelling. In other areas of concern, there were only 1 or 2 women in the entire world who had survived the abuse and had the resilience and the extraordinary ability to, against all odds, speak out and act on behalf of other women. For example, in the area of honor violence and honor killings, it was particularly difficult to find women who had survived, much less who had thrived. Once I decided on the issues and the women's stories, I then had to put together the visual components of the exhibition. I wanted to be sure to have a cohesive thread running throughout the exhibition to hold it together, and was afraid that if that, I was afraid that I would have difficulty having a common denominator for each of the sculptures and yet making them each as different and unique as each story deserved. I tried the first one, and when I finished it, I was quite pleased with how it had come out. It was a life-size steel sculpture that showed the woman encased in a rolled steel phallic form that represented the patriarchal society in which she was trapped and from which she was trying to emerge. And surrounding that phallic form were elements that spoke to the individual woman's specific situation. Once I finished that sculpture, my husband came into the studio and looked at it and said, wow, you have really made a problem for yourself here. And I asked him what the problem was, and he said, well, this sculpture is really strong and compelling. I don't think you're going to be able to do the same for the next 7 of them. And I was afraid of the same thing, actually, and said the only way to know that was going to be to start the next one and see where that led and see if I could keep up the same level of importance, of impact that I was hoping for. For each of the sculptures, I had the luxury of going through hundreds of photographs on the internet, hundreds of articles, film footage. I could find all of the information I needed right here at my computer. Some of the images of women in burqas were particularly compelling to me. So show the second slide, please. The phallic form that I used as the central core of each of the sculptures looks much like the white burqa that surrounds each of these women. And where their faces are within the burqas are where I place the faces in my sculptures as well. Let's go to slide 3, please. Here, the faces are suggested. They're actually covered. The exterior form quite the same, and the placement of the face trying to emerge, again, was so influential to me. In the fourth slide, I tried to imagine what it was like for a woman to see the entire world through a cross-hatched veil that was hiding her and blocking her vision all of the time. In slide 5, I began drawings of what these shapes would look like in the sculptures that I would create, and group them together in a preliminary arrangement so that I could see an evolving structure for the group. In slide 6, I blew up that first small sketch and used it in the learning center component of the exhibition. And in slide 7, actually installed a steel bird cage, which was filled with origami birds. Each bird had writing from a visitor to the gallery who cared to share their own story of abuse or the abuse of someone they knew. When the exhibition was installed at the Housatonic Museum, this bird cage was in the Me Too, #MeToo learning center that was one of the components of the overall exhibition. Slide 8, please. That's me in the upper left-hand corner. I'm welding part of the central phallic form that's surrounding one of the figures. In the lower left photograph, I'm sanding down some of the areas that were particularly rough after cutting openings in the steel. The other 2 photographs show work in progress. In slide number 9, you see the biography of a woman named Mukhtar May. Her story is called In the Name of Honor. Says below that no woman in the world fights with as much courage for women's rights. and that was quoted from the New York Times. The story of Mukhtar May is a rather astonishing one. So here is how the exhibition showed Mukhtar May's story. And this is in slide 12. Mukhtar May herself is represented in the figure completely covered with the white burqa. Next to her is a woman named Saud, and she was also a victim of honor violence. And below her is another female victim of honor violence. In Mukhtar May's case, her brother, her 16-year-old brother, was accused of looking at another tribe's young woman in the next town over from them in Pakistan. The tribal elders from the woman's tribe wanted to get their honor back, perceiving that the young man took that away from them by looking at this girl. They decided that they would punish his sister in order to put their tribe back in what they felt was a proper standing. They gang raped Mukhtar, threw her naked in the village street, and had her make her way home on her own. In the case of Swad, who had become pregnant out of wedlock, her male relatives decided that the way to bring honor back to their tribe from her, what is the word, lack of decency, was to pour gasoline over her and burn her to death. She actually survived, delivered her child, and continues to live in England at this time. In fact, if you'll show slide 10, this is Swad's story called Burned Alive. And on the right-hand side is how I've represented her in the sculpture. On the left-hand side is the photograph of her wearing a mask and staying hidden today in London. If any of her male relatives were to find her, there would be other attempts to put her to death. Back at slide 12, the woman in the lowest part of these sculpture of three is buried in the sand up to her waist and is surrounded by stones. She's been buried with her hands and legs immovable, and there is a ring of male relatives around her, each of whom has a pile of stones about the size as the ones in the sculpture. Tradition says that these stones should be not so large to kill with one blow, and not so small that they can't eventually kill. And so the relatives throw, the male relatives throw these stones at her until she dies. Behind the sculpture grouping, you see a photograph of a woman in this position. being buried up to her waist. And on the right-hand side of the presentation, you see the story of Mukhtar and more complete information about honor violence. Mukhtar not only survived the rape, but her own father and brother helped her to defy tribal customs and build a school for girls and for girls' education in their village. All of her time and all of the monies that she makes from her book go to funding of that school. The next person that I would like to speak to you about comes from the United States, and she represents the issue of transphobia. Not too many years ago, the Emmy Award winning actress Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, representing the tipping point in acceptance for transgender people. In slide 14, on the left-hand side, we see a representation of that Time magazine cover and the very elegant Miss Cox being honored for her work on behalf of the gay and transgender community. In my representation of her at the center of the slide, her body is separated and filled with male and female dolls that represent the conflicting genders, not only within her, but within all of us. Believing as I do that gender is a fluid thing, I feel that each of us has male and female qualities and attributes within us, some much more feminine, some more masculine, whether we're men or women. In Laverne's case, she was born an identical twin boy. Her brother grew up to be gay and an activist for gay rights in the entertainment industry. Laverne grew up to become a transgender woman when she was in college and is a documentary filmmaker, an Emmy Award winning actress in Orange is the New Black, and a vibrant spokesperson on behalf of the transgender community. In this particular slide, there are two students who were brought to the gallery by their art professor, and they are drawing the sculptures that are in the exhibition. In slide number 13, you see the details more closely of the dolls inside of the central body, and all of this is being held together by barbed wire. Slide 15 is a further detail, as are slide 16 and 17. Just a bit of comic relief to find the shoes in this slide. I took the feet over to Marshalls and tried on all of the shoes that I thought might be able to fit and look appropriate for the sculpture. And by the time I found these, there were 3 or 4 young children that were following me around, watching as I tried on each of the different possibilities. The next issue in Woman that I would like to speak to you about, we can see in slide 18. Most of the world has already been introduced to Malala Yousafzai. Malala, at 16 years old, was the youngest person to ever receive, and I don't have my notes in front of me, the youngest person to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And here we have her on the cover of Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. On the right-hand side of the slide, we see her accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. Malala's story is a particularly heroic one. In slide 19, we see the representation of a group of women in Malala's country of Pakistan who are demonstrating, holding pictures of Malala and proclaiming, "I am Malala." All of these young women taking to the streets, demanding the right to education as she demanded the right to education. One day when Malala was on the school bus on her way to school, 3 members of the Taliban boarded the bus, called out for Malala by name, stood up close, and shot her in the temple at point blank range. That bullet went through her forehead, severed internal organs in her head and ear, and then lodged in her shoulder. She was air-vacked out of the country and treated in London, miraculously surviving the attempted assassination. Before and since that time, she's been a tireless advocate for the rights of all girls and all women to have educational opportunities, and spends her time and resources making that happen on a global level. In slide 20, we see a close-up of the sculptures themselves, and slide 21 allows you to see the construction of the face in more detail. The next issue that I would like to share with you is in slide 22. This is the pervasive global issue of sex trafficking. The young woman in the photograph here is Gina Pinchy, and below we see her with John Kerry accepting an award on behalf of other women who have suffered from the same plight. In slide 23, we see the rolled steel form, this time surrounded by neon lights representing the La Noche Hotel, where Gina was kidnapped and held behind bars for years, where she was forced through drugs, isolation, and physical abuse to be a sex slave for the local community. The very people who one would think would help a young girl escape that plight were actually the patrons of La Noche Hotel and participated in her abuse. The actual photograph of Gina is in the bird cage at the head of the sculpture. Slide 24 gives a better detail of this. The next story is of Grace Akilo. Grace was a young high school student at a Catholic boarding school in Uganda. One night while she was asleep, Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army broke into the Catholic school, rounded up all of the girls, and forced them on, in some cases, what was a death march into the jungles to be used as brides for the soldiers and warriors in their fight against the government. In slide 25, we see Grace carrying an AK-47 rifle. The rifle given to each of the girls who made it to the end of the death march into the camps, where they were told that this rifle is their lives and everything about their lives would be determined by this weapon. They were forced to kill each other. They were forced to kill relatives, mothers, fathers, siblings. They were turned into dispensable soldiers for the Army's agenda. It was very difficult to get an AK-47 to put on this sculpture. You can't legally buy AK-47s in the United States, although there are certainly thousands of them on our streets. The one that I used here is a military training weapon that's non-operable, but the same weight and the same details as the actual rifle. And to make absolutely sure that no one coming to the exhibition pulled it off the sculpture or had access to it to use as a threat, this is triple bolted to the steel and really not removable. Even if it were removable, it's a non-working rifle. The skull at Grace's foot speaks to the fact that that hundreds of skulls of young soldiers were found in Uganda in the jungles where these fights were taking place. Slide 26 shows me in the left-hand side making sure that the original template for the central core of the sculptures would indeed be life-size and would fit my purposes. On the right-hand side is the beginning of the sculpture of Grace. In slide 27, there's the further detail of Grace. And on the right-hand side, I included a drawing of one of the college students who spent class in the gallery studying the exhibition. In slide 28, you can see that when you are standing at the exhibit, there's text that tells you the type of abuse that is being addressed, in this case, child soldiers. It tells you the name of the woman who is being honored. Here it's Grace Akalo in Uganda in 1996, which is when she was abducted. At the bottom of the text panel, the same story is told in Spanish. The reason for that is that when I was working in my studio one day and a workman from Haiti came to the house, he looked at the sculptures in the studio and he said, "Oh, I don't like that at all." And I explained to him why I was doing the sculptures, and though I could appreciate why he wouldn't like them, what their purpose was. And when I finished telling that, he looked at me and he said, "You promised me that when you show these, you do it in Spanish so that my people can understand." And so all of the stories are told in English and in Spanish. And in the center of the text panel, there's a Q code, which if you put your smartphone against it, will give you a more complete story of each woman's background and lives. The incredible woman that I chose to represent the next issue, which is domestic violence, is an extraordinary woman named Maria Depena. Maria is from Brazil, and when she was a young graduate student in pharmacology at university in Brazil, she met her husband, who was also going for his advanced degree. They got married and had children, and he became a legal resident of Brazil. Once he got that residency, he started to abuse Maria and abuse the children. One night when she was asleep, he shot her in the back and she became a paraplegic. In Brazil in 1983, there was no way that a woman could legally hold her husband responsible for any abuse against her, even shooting her in the back. When she got out of the hospital and returned home to take care of her two young daughters, he then tried to electrocute her in the shower. In slide 31, you see the actual photograph of Maria in the background, and then the sculpture showing her as the paraplegic that she became. Despite all of that, she's worked tirelessly her entire life on behalf of women suffering from domestic violence abuse, and has an institute called the Maria da Penha Instituto in Brazil that has made monumental difference in the lives of women in that area of the world. In one of the poorest countries of the world, girl children are still being sold to older men as child brides. The next story is that of Najud Ali. Najud Ali was sold to her husband when she was 10 years old. He was 25 years older than she. And in an extraordinary display of courage and vision, she escaped from that marriage and became the youngest girl to ever be legally divorced. Until the case of Najud, no other girl in Yemen or that part of the world would have been released from her husband and allowed her freedom. The sculpture of Najud in the bamboo cage with a prayer rug beneath her feet is metaphorical for the condition that she was kept in. Once married, she was brought back to a distant village, her husband's distant village, where her mother-in-law and sister-in-law held her down as she was raped repeatedly and kept her as a slave and prisoner in their home, never to go outside or mingle with anybody else other than the immediate family. Slide 33 shows her small hand grasping that prison. Slide 34 shows the actual Jude when she was a free and carefree 10-year-old with one of her siblings at her side. And slide 35 shows her with Hillary Clinton and her lawyer, Shada Nasser, in the United States, being honored for her courage and her advocacy to end the practice of child brides. The last story that is represented in the exhibition and that I'll share with you is that of Juarez Deary. In 1970, Juarez Deary was a 5-year-old girl living in Somalia. She was brought into the surrounding woods near her village, held down by her aunties, and became a victim of the cultural practice of genital mutilation. In Somalia, over 90% of all girls are still genitally mutilated today. The same occurs in Egypt and many other parts of the Middle East. This mutilation is quite different than a male circumcision because in male circumcision, the organ is still healthy and able to perform normally, whereas in female genital mutilation, there is a monstrous distortion of the body, and it can no longer continue its normal functions. Slide 37 shows the sculpture of Juarez holding a teddy bear, as perhaps a 5-year-old would, and shows the blade of a large buzz saw attacking the lower part of her body. As she herself recounts, the procedure of mutilation was like a rusty saw ripping through her. In the background is an actual photograph of Juarez. She was a very successful runway model and photographic model for Chanel and for the commercial cosmetic industry. After a very successful fashion career, she's stopped working and built a clinic that provides free reconstructive surgery for any woman who would like to have their body returned to a more normal condition. This surgery is offered free of charge. She continues to be an advocate against this horrific torture. I want to thank all of you for listening to me and being open to hearing these stories. The hope is that awareness will bring change, and the more of us who share these realities and are opposed to the realities, the more chance there is to help others. So thank you all very much.